Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times, a Prancing Pony podcast production. I'm the Man of the West, and it's time to keep Series 12 and Week 89 going. At the end of Series 11, we said farewell to the tragic tale of Turin Turambar. So today, we return to the revised letters for Tolkien Tuesdays. We haven't been in the letters since February, and even I didn't realize it had been that long, so it really is about time. We're going to go ahead and pick up where we left off, and that's letter 214, which took us the final 3 weeks of Series 9's Tolkien Tuesdays. It also happened to be the last published letter from 1958, and so we moved to 1959, where we'll quickly cover 2 new and short letters before diving into letter 215 over the following couple of weeks. Now, you might recall that at the end of letter 214, Tolkien, writing to a reader by the name of A.C. Nunn, wrote that, "Shortly after I received your enquiries, my wife, who had been ill most of 1958, celebrated the return of health by a fall in the garden, smashing up her left arm so badly that she is still crippled and in plaster." Well, letter 214A reminds us of this while providing more details. Written on February 4th, 1959 to Father Alex Jones, clearly no relation, Tolkien says that the accident took place in November and that it was a compound fracture of her left arm. No wonder her injury, quote, "has made inroads on my time," as he writes, but despite that, Tolkien says that he wishes still to be concerned with the Bible de Jerusalem. Now, we'll learn more about this when we get to letter 294, written in 1967, but this is the first time in the letters that we learn of his involvement with this biblical translation. Now, for those unfamiliar with the translation, it began with a French translation in 1956, which in turn was based on the original Hebrew and Greek texts rather than the Latin Vulgate. Tolkien's involvement in this was actually briefly mentioned by Clyde S. Kilby in his 1976 work, Tolkien and the Silmarillion, where Kilby, an American professor and influential Inklings scholar, wrote, "It is known that Tolkien collaborated in the preparation of the Jerusalem Bible by translating the book of Job into English from what he called a bad literal French version. His keen sense of rightness led him to learn a considerable amount of Hebrew preparatory to his task." Now, the following month, Tolkien penned letter 214B to his son Michael. Things have gone from bad to worse for the professor. Not only can Edith still not yet use her arm, Tolkien himself is very much the worse for wear. He had just undergone surgery for appendicitis and actually wrote this letter to Michael from the hospital. "I have taken a nasty knock in every way. I think physically I had just come to the end of the tether, and certainly I am also near it financially. I've got to get out of this soaking house, or I shall be ruined." I don't think he's saying the hospital has a spa that he's enjoying. Sounds more like it's soaking him financially. In fact, that point is confirmed a bit later. He writes, "Since she and I could live in a hotel for less than it costs me alone here, I think we shall have to go away to Bournemouth." He laments that such a procedure, quote, "is not good at my age," don't call me out, and fears that, among other darknesses that cloud the horizon, "I see no more smoking written plain and large before me." So, it is with those circumstances in the very near rearview mirror that we go to letter 215, which is actually a series of drafts to Walter Allen from New Statesman, a UK magazine. Tolkien had been asked to take part in a symposium that would later be published in a children's book supplement. He was sent very specific questions, and were given those questions in the editorial introduction to the letter. How far do you write with a specific audience in mind? I.e., how do you feel writing for children differs from writing for adult readers? Oh, I think we can already tell where this is headed. They go on, to what extent do you feel that writing for children satisfies a need in yourself, for example, by expressing a side of you repressed in ordinary life, or by the exigencies of writing for adults? How do you see the relation between The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings? Are you conscious of a didactic purpose? And if so, how do you construe it? Well, this week and next, we'll take a look at Tolkien's answers. We're going to start with Tolkien's explanation that he isn't going to be able to take part in this symposium. After all, he's, quote, "only recently returned from convalescence after an operation, and is dreadfully behind on work, with the next term beginning soon." He then points Mr. Allen to the work we'd have pointed to him as well, writing, "I have said all that I have to say about writing for children in my contribution on fairy stories. Writing for children has no special interest to me." An aside. If I've learned one thing in all these weeks of Tolkien Tuesdays, it is that Professor Tolkien rarely beat around the bush or minced words. He never went out of his way to be mean about it, but you rarely had to wonder what he really thought. Anyway, he goes on to explain that when he wrote The Hobbit, he had still been influenced by the convention that fairy stories are naturally directed to children, with or without the silly added waggery from 7 to 70. And I had children of my own. But the desire to address children as such had nothing to do with the story as such in itself, or the urge to write it. But it had some unfortunate effects on the mode of expression and narrative method, which if I had not been rushed, I should have corrected. Intelligent children of good taste, of which there seem quite a number, have always, I am glad to say, singled out the points in manner where the address is to children as blemishes. Well, with the benefit of hindsight, Tolkien considered this a lot more thoroughly before writing The Lord of the Rings. But as he points out, that work was not specially addressed to children or to any other class of people, but to anyone who enjoyed a long, exciting story of the sort that I myself naturally enjoy. Still, coming back to this idea about writing for children, Tolkien explains that he's certainly not interested in writing for them, i.e. in addressing directly and expressly those who cannot understand adult language. He explains that while his stories might be called fairy stories, it's not because he wants to write to children, but simply because I wish to write this kind of story and no other. And in our last bit, before we wrap it up for this week, he speaks to one other of those initial questions. I do this, write fairy stories, that is, because if I do not apply too grandiloquent a title to it, I find that my comment on the world is most easily and naturally expressed in this way. I'm not conscious of any repression exerted upon me by ordinary life. Since large numbers of adults seem to enjoy what I write, quite enough to keep me happy, I have no need to seek escape to another and possibly less exigent demanding audience. Well, folks, for now, this wraps up this week's Tolkien Tuesday. But join me again next week when we finish Letter 215, starting with Tolkien clarifying what he meant by my comment on the world and the question of allegory. In the meantime, please visit patreon.com/TolkienTimes to learn how you can join the Content Council, get an ad-free feed and a bonus episode every week. And please join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for Word Nerd Wednesday. Podcast listeners, please be sure to subscribe to the show in your podcast apps. For those on YouTube, subscribe to this channel for all of the PPP productions, including my new streaming project, The PPP Plays. And be sure you're following @PrancingPonyPod on social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.